A man died in 1626, and we're still arguing about whether he wrote Shakespeare's plays. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that this same man invented the scientific method, rose to become the most powerful lawyer in England, got thrown in prison for corruption, and then died because he couldn't resist stuffing a chicken with snow during a blizzard. Francis Bacon's life was a study in contradictions, and understanding those contradictions means understanding how the modern world began. Born on January 22nd, 1561, at York House near the Strand in London, Francis Bacon entered a world already prepared for his arrival. His father, Sir Nicholas Bacon, held the position of Lord Keeper of the Great Seal, making him one of the most powerful men in Elizabethan England. His mother, Anne Cook, was no decorative aristocrat. She'd mastered Greek, Latin, Italian, and French at a time when most noblewomen were taught just enough to manage a household. Her sister was married to William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, who would become Queen Elizabeth's chief counsellor and the most influential politician in England for nearly 3 decades. Francis Bacon wasn't born into power, he was born into its epicentre. But wealth and connection don't guarantee health. Biographers agree that young Francis spent much of his childhood at home, too sick to attend regular schooling. The exact nature of his illness remains unclear, but it plagued him throughout his life, a constant reminder that the body fails even when the mind soars. His mother educated him during these homebound years, drilling classical languages into him with Puritan intensity. The household was devoutly Protestant, shaped by Anne's fierce religious convictions. This wasn't gentle spirituality. This was the kind of faith that saw the world as a battleground between good and evil, where every action carried eternal weight. At 12 years old, Francis was healthy enough to attend Trinity College, Cambridge. His older brother Anthony accompanied him. They lived together for 3 years under the personal tutelage of John Whitgift, who would later become Archbishop of Canterbury. The education was rigorous, conducted almost entirely in Latin, following a medieval curriculum that had changed little in centuries. Students read Aristotle, then they read more Aristotle, then they read commentaries on Aristotle, then they debated fine points of Aristotelian logic. Francis hated every minute of it, not because he lacked intellectual capacity. The opposite. He saw through the whole edifice. Here was Aristotle, dead for nearly 2,000 years, still dictating what scholars could think and how they could think it. The ancient Greeks' ideas had calcified into dogma. Question Aristotle, and you question truth itself. Bacon watched his tutors, brilliant men locked in their cells, with a few dusty books, treating ancient texts as scripture rather than starting points. He later called them men of sharp wits, shut up in their cells, if a few authors, chiefly Aristotle, their dictator. That word choice matters. Dictator, not teacher, not authority, dictator, someone who rules through force rather than merit. Bacon believed Aristotle's methods led nowhere, that the unquestioning reverence for ancient wisdom was strangling human progress. This realization at 15 years old would drive everything that followed. The scientific method, the emphasis on experimentation, the rejection of received wisdom, all of it traced back to a teenager sitting in Cambridge, bored and frustrated, watching scholars worship at the altar of dead certainty. But philosophy doesn't pay bills. A year after enrolling at Gray's Inn to study law, Bacon left England to work under Sir Amyas Paulet, the British ambassador to France. Paris in the 1570s offered everything Cambridge lacked: real politics, genuine intrigue, the machinery of power operating in full view. Bacon absorbed it all, learning how diplomacy actually worked, how deals were struck, how information flowed through networks of influence. Then in 1579, his father died. The timing couldn't have been worse. Sir Nicholas had accumulated a substantial sum to purchase an estate for his youngest son, ensuring Francis would have the income and status to pursue a career in public service. But he died before completing the purchase. Francis inherited a fifth of what had been promised, just enough to get into debt. Not enough to live independently. He borrowed money. The debt grew. By 1598, nearly 20 years later, he'd be arrested leaving the Tower of London after a legal consultation. Creditors literally seizing him in the street. Financial desperation shapes decisions. Bacon returned to Gray's Inn in 1579, supplementing his meagre inheritance with a grant from his mother of a manor near Romford that generated £46 annually. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. He needed a position, a post at court, something that would provide security and the freedom to pursue knowledge. Through his uncle, Lord Burghley, he applied for various positions. They all failed. Advancement required patience and connections, and while Bacon had the latter, the former tested him constantly. He qualified as an outer barrister in 1582. 2 years later, he won election to Parliament representing Cornwall. This marked the beginning of a political career that would span nearly 4 decades, from 1584 to 1617. His first major political writing appeared that same year, a letter of advice to Queen Elizabeth. 23 years old, drowning in debt, and he's offering counsel to the most powerful woman in Europe. The audacity is breathtaking. So is the quality of the writing, Elizabeth noticed. But notice doesn't translate to position. Bacon spent the next several years watching lesser talents advance past him, brilliant men promoted while he remained on the margins. The frustration must have been crushing. Here was someone who could see further than his peers, think more clearly, write more persuasively, yet he couldn't secure the appointment he needed. Part of the problem was his personality. Bacon was cautious, calculating, watchful. He didn't inspire passionate loyalty the way more charismatic figures did. People respected his mind. They didn't warm to his person. Around 1591, probably no later than July, Bacon made the acquaintance of Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex. 23 years old, dashing, impulsive, passionate, everything Bacon wasn't. Essex was also a favourite of the Queen, a rising star with military glory and political ambition. More importantly, he liked Bacon. The friendship, if you can call it that, began warmly. Essex provided patronage. Bacon provided counsel. The arrangement worked until it didn't. Essex's problem was that he confused boldness with wisdom. He took military risks that failed. He pushed political schemes that backfired. He accumulated enemies faster than allies, burning through the Queen's goodwill with alarming speed. Bacon watched this happening. He advised caution. Essex ignored him. The relationship between them grew complicated, a mixture of genuine affection, political calculation, and mounting frustration on both sides. The disaster came in 1601. Essex, convinced he could force the Queen to accept his demands, attempted what can only be described as a coup. He gathered armed supporters and marched through London, expecting the city to rise in his favour. It didn't. The attempt collapsed within hours. Essex was arrested, tried for treason, and faced execution. Bacon, in his capacity as Queen's counsel, prosecuted the case. This is where the story gets ugly. Essex had been Bacon's patron, his friend, the man who'd supported him when others wouldn't. Now Bacon stood in court dismantling Essex's defence, arguing that armed rebellion against the crown was treason regardless of the rebels' intentions. He fixed responsibility on Essex personally, cutting through the various excuses and justifications, making the case that collecting an armed force and marching on the palace constituted clear evidence of treasonable intent. Essex was executed. Bacon's reputation never recovered from the stain. Critics then and now have argued he should have recused himself, that prosecuting your benefactor violated every principle of loyalty and friendship. Bacon's defenders point out he was Queen's counsel, that refusing the assignment would have ended his career immediately, that he was doing his job. Both positions miss something important. Bacon made a choice. He chose his career over his friend. Whether that choice was moral or pragmatic or inevitable doesn't change what it reveals about the man. When forced to decide between personal loyalty and political survival, he chose survival. He always would. Elizabeth died in 1603. James I took the throne, and suddenly Bacon's fortunes reversed. The new king knighted him almost immediately. From 1604 to 1618, Bacon climbed the ladder of state power systematically, filling a succession of increasingly prestigious positions. In 1613, he became Attorney General. 5 years later, at 57 years old, he reached the summit, Lord Chancellor, the highest appointed office in England. He also received noble titles, becoming Baron Verulam and Viscount St Albans. 3 years before his knighthood, in 1606, Bacon married Alice Barnum. He was 45. She was a wealthy heiress. The marriage appears to have been primarily financial, a practical arrangement between a man who needed money and a woman whose fortune needed managing. Bacon's secretary later wrote that the marriage involved much conjugal love and respect, but other accounts paint a different picture. Alice was interested in status and wealth. When Bacon's finances deteriorated, she complained bitterly. Some sources suggest she travelled among their circle of friends, asking for financial assistance, trying to maintain the lifestyle she'd expected. The marriage produced no children. Whether this was by choice, by chance, or due to the couple's apparent incompatibility remains unclear. What's certain is that as Bacon climbed higher in political life, his personal life remained strangely empty. He had colleagues, not friends. He had a wife, not a partner. He had power, not peace. The apex of his political career came in 1618, when James made him Lord Chancellor. Bacon was now the most powerful lawyer in England, the king's chief legal advisor, a man who sat at the centre of every major political decision. He'd spent his entire adult life pursuing this position. He held it for 3 years. In 1621, everything collapsed. Bacon's enemies in Parliament, and he'd accumulated many over the decades, brought charges of corruption. Specifically, they accused him of accepting bribes in cases where he served as judge. Bacon could have fought the charges. He could have denied them, forced a full investigation, used his considerable legal skills to defend himself. Instead, he confessed. Yes, he'd accepted gifts from litigants. Yes, he'd taken money from people whose cases were pending before him. He maintained the payments never influenced his judgments, that he'd often ruled against those who'd paid him, but he admitted the basic facts. Why confess? The answer reveals the political calculation behind the charges. The real target wasn't Bacon, it was the Duke of Buckingham, the king's favourite, a man far more powerful and far more vulnerable than Bacon. If Parliament had gone after Buckingham directly, James would have fought back, triggering a constitutional crisis. Bacon was the scapegoat. By sacrificing him, James protected Buckingham. And Bacon, reading the situation clearly, understood that resistance was futile. The king wasn't going to save him. Fighting would only make things worse. He resigned from office. He was fined £40,000, an enormous sum. He was briefly imprisoned in the Tower of London. He was banished from court. He lost every position he'd spent his life acquiring. At 60 years old, Francis Bacon's political career ended in disgrace. But something unexpected happened next. The fall from power, devastating as it was, freed him from the endless demands of political life. For the first time in decades, Bacon could focus entirely on what he'd always claimed mattered most: philosophy. The final 5 years of his life, from 1621 to 1626, produced some of his most important work. No longer bound by political obligations, he threw himself into his grand project, the Instauratio Magna, the Great Instauration, his plan for completely rebuilding human knowledge on new foundations. He couldn't finish it. The task was too large, the time too short. But he completed crucial parts. In 1622, he published Historia Ventorum, a history of winds. The following year came Historia Vitae et Mortis, examining life and death through systematic observation rather than classical authority. These weren't just books, they were demonstrations of his new method, showing how natural philosophy should work when freed from Aristotelian constraints. In 1623, he published an expanded Latin edition of his earlier work, The Advancement of Learning. In 1625, a third edition of his essays appeared, enlarged and refined. The essays deserve attention because they reveal a different Bacon than the one who wrote philosophical treatises. Here he's practical, worldly, offering advice about everything from friendship to fortune, to how to handle a difficult boss. The prose is dense, aphoristic, quotable. Knowledge is power. That's Bacon. If you would work any man, you must either know his nature and fashions, and so lead him, or his ends, and so persuade him, or his weaknesses and disadvantages, and so awe him, or those that have interest in him, and so govern him. Also Bacon. These aren't the words of an idealistic philosopher. This is someone who spent 40 years navigating political power, learning how humans actually behave rather than how they should behave. But we need to talk about the scientific method, because that's what Bacon is remembered for. And understanding what he actually contributed requires separating legend from reality. The story usually goes that Bacon invented the scientific method, that he single-handedly dragged humanity from medieval superstition into modern empiricism. That's not quite right. What Bacon did was articulate clearly and forcefully a set of principles that others had practiced intuitively. He didn't invent experimentation, he made it systematic. The heart of Bacon's method appears in Novum Organum, published in 1620. The title itself is a direct challenge to Aristotle's Organon, his treatise on logic. Bacon was proposing a new instrument, a new way of thinking that would replace the old syllogistic reasoning that had dominated for centuries. The Baconian method starts by clearing away preconceptions, what Bacon called the idols that cloud human judgment. Then it proceeds through 3 steps. Describe facts systematically, classify those facts into categories based on the presence, absence, or degree of the characteristic being investigated, and finally reject what doesn't connect to the phenomenon while determining what does. This sounds simple. It wasn't. It represented a fundamental inversion of how natural philosophy had worked for 2,000 years. Instead of starting with grand principles and deducing specific facts, Bacon wanted investigators to start with specific observations and carefully build toward general principles. Instead of reasoning from authority, he wanted reasoning from evidence. Instead of elegant theories disconnected from reality, he wanted messy experiments that revealed how nature actually behaved. Crucially, Bacon insisted that knowledge should serve practical purposes. Philosophy wasn't meant to be an abstract intellectual exercise. It was supposed to improve human life, to give humanity power over nature through understanding. This connection between knowledge and utility would become central to modern science. The assumption that research should produce useful results, that understanding nature means being able to manipulate it. We'll explore these philosophical contributions in depth later, along with the specific details of his method and his influence on the scientific revolution. For now, what matters is understanding that Bacon lived 2 lives simultaneously. One was the public life of a politician climbing toward power, making compromises, accepting corruption, betraying friends when necessary. The other was the private life of a philosopher, imagining a complete transformation of human knowledge, dreaming of a world where systematic investigation replaced ancient authority. These two lives never reconciled. The politician needed the philosopher's reputation to justify his ambitions. The philosopher needed the politician's position to have influence. But they pulled in opposite directions, creating tensions that defined Bacon's entire existence. He wanted to serve truth and serve power. He wanted to reform knowledge and reform England. He wanted to be remembered as a great thinker and live as a successful statesman. He achieved some of each and paid the price for both. The corruption charges destroyed his political legacy. The philosophical works established his intellectual reputation. 400 years later, we remember him primarily for ideas he developed during the years when he had the least political influence. The great irony of Francis Bacon's life is that his fall from power made his lasting contribution possible. Had he remained Lord Chancellor until his death, we might remember him as just another Elizabethan politician, successful but ultimately forgettable. Instead, we remember him as the man who helped create the modern world. But that creation came at a cost we're only beginning to understand. And the contradictions in Bacon's character mirror contradictions in the scientific worldview he helped establish. Knowledge and power do belong together, as Bacon insisted. The question we still haven't answered is whether that's a promise or a warning. The warning came from his own experience, not abstract theory. Bacon knew exactly what happened when power operated without accountability because he'd watched it destroy people throughout his career. He'd participated in it. The Essex prosecution wasn't some unfortunate necessity. It was a calculated choice to preserve his own position at the expense of a man who'd supported him for years. And Bacon understood something crucial about that choice. It worked. Essex died. Bacon advanced. The crown rewarded loyalty, not friendship. This wasn't a moral failing unique to Bacon. It was how power functioned in Elizabethan and Jacobean England. Patronage networks determined everything. Access to the monarch meant wealth, position, influence. Lose that access and you lost everything. Bacon's entire career had been a desperate scramble for proximity to power, hampered by chronic debt, limited resources, and the constant threat of political enemies. He succeeded through intelligence, persistence, and willingness to do whatever proved necessary. The philosophical writings emerged from this same environment. When Bacon wrote about systematic knowledge gathering, about the importance of organized investigation, about institutions dedicated to discovering truth, he was describing an alternative to the chaotic, personality-driven world he inhabited. Natural philosophy could be different. It could operate according to principles rather than patronage. Scientists could collaborate instead of compete. Knowledge could accumulate systematically rather than depending on individual genius scattered across generations. This vision of organized science was revolutionary precisely because it rejected the assumptions governing every other area of Elizabethan life. But Bacon never questioned the fundamental premise. Power itself wasn't the problem. The issue was making power effective, making it productive, directing it toward useful ends. A well-organized state with proper institutions could achieve extraordinary things. Science needed similar organization. Both required hierarchy, coordination, central direction. Freedom wasn't the goal, efficiency was. The Novum Organum, published in 1620, when Bacon was 59 and serving as Lord Chancellor, laid out this vision with remarkable clarity. The title itself was a challenge. Aristotle's organon had dominated logic for nearly 2 millennia. Bacon was proposing a new instrument to replace it entirely. Not modify it, not improve it, replace it. The book opens with an illustration showing a ship sailing beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the ancient boundary of the known world. The message was explicit. Traditional philosophy had confined human understanding within artificial limits. Bacon's method would break through those boundaries into unexplored territory. But the Novum Organum wasn't just about method. It was a diagnosis of why previous natural philosophy had failed and a prescription for fixing it. The diagnosis centered on what Bacon called the four idols, systematic sources of error that corrupted human understanding. These weren't individual mistakes. They were built into how people think, how they communicate, how they receive ideas from previous generations. The idols of the tribe were errors inherent to human nature itself. People see patterns where none exist. They prefer confirming evidence over contradicting evidence. They impose order on random phenomena. They trust their senses, even when those senses mislead them. These tendencies served evolutionary purposes, helping humans survive dangerous environments by making quick judgments based on limited information. But they produced terrible philosophy and worse science. The idols of the cave represented individual biases, shaped by personal experience, education, temperament. Someone raised in one intellectual tradition sees the world differently than someone raised in another. A person's profession colours their thinking. Their reading history creates blind spots. No individual can achieve perfect objectivity because every individual inhabits their own cave, seeing only shadows of reality filtered through unique circumstances. The idols of the marketplace arose from language itself. Words meant to facilitate communication actually obscure truth. People use the same term to describe different things. They create words for concepts that don't exist. They argue about definitions rather than investigating reality. Philosophical disputes often reduce to semantic confusion, debaters talking past each other because they attach different meanings to identical words. Bacon was particularly concerned with this problem. He'd watched Parliament debates dissolve into terminological arguments. He'd seen legal cases hinge on word definitions rather than justice. Language was supposed to be a tool for truth. Instead, it became an obstacle. The idols of the theatre were perhaps most dangerous because they were intentional. These were entire philosophical systems, elaborate theoretical frameworks that captured people's imagination despite having no empirical foundation. Aristotelian physics, medieval cosmology, the various schools of ancient philosophy. All of them were stage plays, entertaining performances disconnected from how nature actually worked. They persisted because they were sophisticated, because they provided satisfying explanations, because dismantling them required admitting that generations of brilliant thinkers had been fundamentally wrong. Clearing away these idols was only the first step. Bacon needed to explain what should replace them. His answer was the method outlined across the Novum Organum's 2 books. Start with systematic observation. Gather facts extensively, not selectively. Don't cherry-pick evidence supporting your theory. Collect everything relevant. Then organize those facts into tables showing presence, absence, and degree. Where does the phenomenon occur? Where doesn't it occur? How does it vary? This tabulation reveals patterns that casual observation misses. It forces investigators to confront contradictory evidence instead of ignoring it. Finally, use these tables to identify true causes, eliminate explanations contradicted by the evidence. What remains, however unexpected, is likely true. This sounds straightforward. It wasn't. Bacon was asking natural philosophers to abandon 2,000 years of methodology. Aristotelian science worked by identifying essential natures and deducing properties from those natures. Bacon wanted science to work backward, inferring natures from observed properties. This inversion required different mental habits, different standards of proof, different criteria for what counted as knowledge. It also required patience. Bacon's method was slow. Gathering comprehensive observations took time. Building proper tables demanded meticulous organization. Resisting premature conclusions required discipline. Most natural philosophers wanted immediate results. They wanted elegant theories explaining everything. Bacon offered grinding labor producing modest provisional insights that might eventually accumulate into genuine understanding. The utility principle ran through everything. Knowledge existed to improve human life. This wasn't an afterthought, it was central to Bacon's entire project. Traditional philosophy aimed at contemplation, at understanding for its own sake. Bacon considered this fundamentally misguided. What good was understanding if it didn't produce results? The point of studying nature was controlling nature, bending it to human purposes, extracting from it the power to transform material conditions. This emphasis on practical application marked Bacon as distinctly modern. Ancient and medieval philosophers had occasionally discussed practical knowledge, but they generally ranked it below theoretical wisdom. Knowing universal principles was superior to knowing how to build better machines. Bacon reversed this hierarchy. The test of knowledge was what it could do. A theory that made accurate predictions and enabled new technologies was superior to a theory that merely satisfied intellectual curiosity. Critics have spent 4 centuries debating whether this was liberation or limitation. Bacon freed science from sterile scholasticism. He gave it permission to focus on problems that mattered to ordinary people. He connected investigation to tangible improvement. But he also reduced knowledge to instrumentality. If something didn't have practical use, did it have value? If understanding couldn't be converted into power, was it worth pursuing? These questions weren't abstract. They shaped how modern science developed. The emphasis on applied research, on patents, on technology transfer, on measuring scientific progress through economic impact, all of this traces back to Bacon's insistence that knowledge and power belong together. The New Atlantis, published posthumously in 1626, illustrated what this philosophy might achieve. The book describes a fictional island called Bensalem, where science has transformed society. The key institution is Salomon's House, a state-sponsored research centre where investigators systematically study nature. They maintain laboratories, libraries, experimental gardens. They coordinate efforts across multiple projects. They share findings rather than hoarding discoveries, and they produce an endless stream of innovations: new crops, better medicines, sophisticated machines, understanding weather, preserving food, extending life. Salomon's House resembles nothing that existed in Bacon's time, but it anticipated what would emerge over the following centuries: research universities, government laboratories, corporate R&D departments, the entire institutional apparatus of modern science. Bacon imagined a world where investigation was organised, funded, coordinated toward common goals, where knowledge accumulated systematically rather than depending on scattered geniuses working in isolation, where society supported research because research demonstrably improved society. This vision proved remarkably prescient. Within decades of Bacon's death, the Royal Society of London formed explicitly based on Baconian principles. Its motto, nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it, captured Bacon's rejection of authority in favour of evidence. Its emphasis on experimentation, on publishing results, on collective investigation, all reflected Bacon's influence. Similar institutions followed across Europe. The scientific revolution didn't happen because individuals suddenly became smarter. It happened because investigation became institutional, organised, systematic. But there's something unsettling about the New Atlantis that often gets overlooked. Salomon's House isn't democratic. It's hierarchical, secretive, elitist. The researchers decide which discoveries to share with the public and which to keep hidden. They operate independently of political oversight. They serve the state but exist outside normal accountability structures. Bacon presents this as necessary for effective science. Investigators need autonomy. They need protection from political interference. They need resources without strings attached. Yet this autonomy creates its own problems. Who decides research priorities? Who determines which knowledge is too dangerous to release? Who ensures these powerful institutions serve public good rather than private interest? Bacon never addressed these questions seriously. He assumed that properly organized inquiry would naturally benefit humanity. The possibility that systematic knowledge might be used for oppression, for exploitation, for destruction, didn't trouble him. Or if it did, he left no record of such concerns. This blind spot is revealing. Bacon spent decades navigating political corruption. He understood how power operated without ethical constraints. He knew from personal experience that institutions didn't automatically serve noble purposes. Yet when imagining scientific institutions, he assumed they'd be different, perhaps because he needed them to be different. The philosophical project required believing that knowledge could transcend the moral compromises pervading political life. Science could be pure even if politics was dirty. The contradiction here was baked into Bacon's worldview from the beginning. He wanted knowledge to produce power but assumed that power would be benevolent. He wanted systematic investigation but assumed it would yield truth rather than just useful fictions. He wanted to free human understanding from authority but created a new authority in organized science. These tensions didn't resolve. They became part of modernity itself. We still struggle with the same questions. How do we support scientific research while ensuring accountability? How do we encourage innovation while preventing misuse? How do we balance the autonomy scientists need with the oversight society requires? Bacon didn't cause these problems, but his philosophy articulated them with unusual clarity, and his influence helped establish the institutional structures within which they play out. The final 5 years of Bacon's life, after his fall from political power, were consumed by writing. He knew time was running out. The great project, the Instauratio Magna, remained incomplete. He'd published the Novum Organum, but that was only part 2 of a 6-part plan. The full renovation of human knowledge required works he'd never finish. Still, he pushed forward. 2 natural histories appeared, Historia Ventorum in 1622 and Historia Vitae et Mortis in 1623. These exemplified the Baconian method, systematically gathering observations about wind and about life and death. They weren't theoretical works. They were data collections, raw material for future investigators to analyse. In 1623, he published De Dignitate et Augmentis Scientiarum, an expanded Latin version of his earlier advancement of learning. This surveyed the entire landscape of human knowledge, identifying gaps, suggesting improvements, arguing for systematic organisation of intellectual effort. It was simultaneously brilliant and overwhelming, the kind of comprehensive scheme only someone of Bacon's ambition would attempt. His final work, the Essays, had been growing throughout his career. The first edition, in 1597, contained 10 essays. The 1612 edition expanded to 38. The final 1625 edition included 58 essays covering everything from truth to gardens to revenge to studies. These weren't systematic philosophy. They were practical wisdom, observations about human nature and social life, advice for navigating a complicated world. They were also extraordinarily popular. The essays went through multiple printings, were translated into several languages, influenced writers across Europe. They remain readable today in ways that Bacon's Latin philosophical works often aren't. The style is compressed, aphoristic, dense with insight. Revenge is a kind of wild justice. Men fear death as children fear to go in the dark. Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. These sentences stick because they capture something true about human experience in memorable language. The essays also reveal something Bacon's philosophical works often hide: his understanding of failure. He wrote about disappointment, about ambition thwarted, about the gap between what people intend and what they achieve. These weren't abstract observations. They came from living a life where grand plans repeatedly collided with messy reality. Of Studies contains his most famous lines about reading and its purposes, but it's of great place that cuts deeper. The rising unto place is laborious, and by pains men come to greater pains. He knew what he was talking about. Decades climbing the ladder, compromising, calculating, only to fall spectacularly at the summit. Men in great place are thrice servants, servants of the sovereign or state, servants of fame, and servants of business. These weren't complaints. Bacon never indulged in self-pity. They were observations delivered with the detachment of someone who'd seen the mechanism from inside and understood how it worked. The essays don't offer comfort or easy answers. They offer clarity about human nature's constancy across time and circumstance. Meanwhile, Bacon's health continued deteriorating. The chronic weakness that had plagued him since childhood worsened with age. He suffered from gout, kidney stones, frequent fevers. His body was wearing out faster than his mind. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was a man who'd written extensively about prolonging life, about the possibility of defeating aging through systematic investigation, and he couldn't even keep himself comfortable. In March 1626, something happened that would cement Bacon's legend in a way all his philosophical works couldn't. He was travelling through snow near Highgate with the royal physician when a question occurred to him. Could cold preserve flesh the way salt did? It was the kind of question his method demanded be answered through experiment rather than speculation. They stopped the carriage. Bacon purchased a chicken from a nearby cottage, had the woman gut it, then stuffed the cavity with snow himself. He wanted to see if the cold would slow decay. This wasn't theoretical anymore. He was doing science, testing a hypothesis through direct manipulation of materials. Exactly what he'd been advocating for decades. The experiment worked in a sense. The cold did preserve the chicken, but Bacon caught a severe chill. Within days he developed bronchitis. The condition worsened rapidly. He took refuge at the Earl of Arundel's house, but the room assigned to him was damp and poorly heated. His fever spiked, his breathing grew laboured. On April 9th, 1626, Francis Bacon died. He was 65 years old. The official cause was pneumonia brought on by the experiment with snow. Whether the story is entirely accurate doesn't matter much. It's too perfect a death for a philosopher of experimental method, killed by his own insistence on testing ideas rather than accepting them on authority. John Aubrey's account, supposedly told to him by Thomas Hobbes, describes Bacon as a martyr to science. The image stuck. Here was a man who literally died pursuing knowledge through empirical investigation. The chicken experiment became more famous than anything in his natural histories. It captured the imagination in ways systematic tables of observations never could. What did Bacon leave behind? Financially, not much. His estate was worth about £7,000 in assets and £6,000 in land. His debts exceeded £23,000. Even in death, the money situation remained a disaster. His wife Alice survived him by many years, eventually remarrying. She wore a robe he'd given her until she died, or so his chaplain claimed, though other accounts suggest the marriage had been troubled. Intellectually, the legacy was more complicated. The Instauratio Magna remained incomplete. Only 2 of the 6 planned parts had been published. The grand reorganization of all human knowledge existed mostly as fragments and outlines. Future generations would have to piece together what he'd intended from the materials he'd managed to finish. But here's what's strange about Bacon's influence. His specific methodological proposals didn't survive intact. Nobody followed the Baconian method precisely as he'd outlined it in Novum Organum. The tables, the systematic elimination process, the careful progression from observations to axioms, all this proved too rigid for actual scientific practice. What survived was something more fundamental: the attitude, the approach, the conviction that knowledge should be built from observation rather than inherited from authority. Scientists didn't follow Bacon's method, but they absorbed his spirit. They believed, as he'd insisted, that systematic investigation could yield reliable knowledge about the natural world. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, claimed Bacon as its inspiration. The Fellows called themselves following in his footsteps, pursuing the kind of collaborative, empirical research he'd envisioned. Whether they actually practiced Baconian science is debatable, but they believed they were, and that belief shaped how they worked. In France, the philosophers of the Enlightenment elevated Bacon even higher. Voltaire called him the father of experimental philosophy in 1733. D'Alembert and Diderot's Encyclopedia listed Bacon as one of the three greatest influences on human thought, alongside Locke and Newton. The French philosophers saw in Bacon a weapon against religious and political authority. His empiricism challenged revealed truth. His emphasis on practical utility questioned traditional learning's value. This political appropriation would have made Bacon uncomfortable. He'd never positioned himself as a radical. He'd served the crown loyally, even when it cost him friendships. He'd argued for moderate reform, not revolution, but ideas escaped their creator's intentions. The empirical method Bacon developed to serve truth ended up serving whoever could wield it most effectively. The scientific revolution that followed didn't happen because of Bacon alone. Galileo, Kepler, Descartes, Newton, all these figures developed their own approaches, often quite different from what Bacon proposed. But Bacon provided something crucial, a philosophical justification for prioritizing observation over tradition, experiment over received wisdom, systematic investigation over individual genius. He also provided something less tangible, but equally important, a vision of what science could become. Not just scattered individuals making occasional discoveries, but organized collaborative effort directed toward improving human welfare. The Research Institute, the Scientific Society, the government-funded laboratory, all these owe something to Bacon's dream of systematized knowledge production. New Atlantis, published posthumously in 1626, sketched this vision most clearly. The utopian island of Bensalem featured Salomon's House, a state-sponsored research institution where investigators gathered data and natural philosophers analysed results. The goal wasn't abstract understanding but practical improvement of human life. Salomon's House anticipated modern research institutions with uncanny accuracy, specialised investigators focusing on particular domains, systematic sharing of results, institutional support for long-term projects. Even the division between data collection and theoretical interpretation matches how science often operates today. Bacon imagined all this before anything like it existed, but he also imagined the social structure surrounding this institution. The scientists of Salomon's House held enormous prestige. Society honoured them, supported them, trusted their judgment. They operated with both freedom and responsibility, pursuing knowledge while serving the common good. This part proved more difficult to realise. The tension between scientific autonomy and social accountability remains unresolved. Bacon's influence on subsequent philosophy was equally complex. Empiricism became a major tradition, but not quite the empiricism Bacon practiced. Locke, Berkeley, Hume, all these British empiricists claimed descent from Bacon while developing positions he wouldn't have recognised. They focused on the theory of knowledge in ways Bacon never did. His concern was method, not epistemology. The scientific method itself evolved far beyond Bacon's proposals. Hypothesis testing, controlled experiments, mathematical modelling, statistical analysis, none of this appears in Novum Organum. Later scientists developed these tools through practice, not by following Bacon's instructions. But they developed them in a context where Bacon's arguments had made systematic empirical investigation respectable and important. What about Bacon's darker legacy, his connection to colonialism, his role in developing ideologies of mastery over nature, his vision of science as power? These questions emerged much later, mostly in the 20th century, as critics began examining the assumptions underlying modern science. Bacon's language is revealing. He wrote about putting nature on the rack to extract her secrets, about humanity's sovereignty over creation, about knowledge as a tool for domination. This wasn't metaphorical. He meant it literally. Natural philosophy should give humans power to control and reshape the world according to their purposes. Whether this attitude caused environmental destruction and colonial exploitation is debatable. Bacon didn't invent the desire to dominate nature or other peoples. Those impulses existed long before he wrote anything. But his philosophy provided intellectual justification for treating both nature and indigenous populations as resources to be systematically exploited. The feminist critique goes deeper. Carolyn Merchant and others argued that Bacon's metaphors reveal a gendered violence. Nature is female, passive, to be penetrated and forced to yield her secrets. The scientist is male, active, extracting knowledge through aggressive interrogation. This framing naturalized both scientific investigation and patriarchal control. Bacon might have been horrified by this interpretation. He saw himself as advocating for methodical patience, not violence. The natural histories were meant to gather observations carefully, respecting nature's complexity. But the language he chose to describe this process carries implications he didn't fully control. These critiques matter because Bacon's influence extended beyond narrow scientific methodology into broader cultural attitudes. The idea that nature exists primarily as a resource for human use, that systematic knowledge equals power, that progress means increasing control over the natural world, all these became common sense in Western culture. Bacon didn't create these attitudes alone, but his philosophy articulated and legitimized them. Yet dismissing Bacon entirely misses what made his work valuable. The insistence on observation over speculation prevented countless errors. The demand for systematic investigation over casual theorizing improved human understanding dramatically. The conviction that knowledge should serve practical purposes helped justify research funding and institutional support. These contributions were real, even if they came with costs we're still calculating. The question isn't whether Bacon was right about everything. He obviously wasn't. His tables didn't work. His natural histories were incomplete. His vision of collaborative research assumed a moral consensus that never materialized. But he asked the right questions. How do we acquire reliable knowledge? How do we overcome the biases clouding our judgment? How do we organize intellectual effort for maximum effect? These questions remain urgent. Bacon's life demonstrates something unsettling about the relationship between personal character and intellectual achievement. He was, by most accounts, not a particularly admirable person. He betrayed friends when politically convenient. He accepted bribes while serving as a judge. He pursued advancement with ruthless calculation. His marriage appears to have been unhappy. His personal relationships were strategic rather than warm. Yet this same person produced philosophical works of genuine importance. The corruption in his political career didn't prevent brilliance in his intellectual work. The capacity for betrayal coexisted with profound insights about human understanding. Genius and venality weren't separate. They were intertwined in the same complex personality. This troubles our preference for moral consistency. We want great thinkers to be good people. When they're not, we struggle to reconcile the achievement with the character. But Bacon forces the recognition that intellectual power and moral virtue are independent variables. Someone can be right about methodology while wrong about ethics, brilliant about epistemology while corrupt about money. His final years working furiously to complete the Instauratio suggests someone aware of running out of time. The dedication to philosophical work after political disgrace wasn't noble retirement, It was desperation. The grand project remained unfinished. The comprehensive reorganization of knowledge stayed fragmentary. He knew he wouldn't complete what he'd envisioned, but he kept writing anyway. That persistence reveals something essential about Bacon's character. He was ambitious, yes, but the ambition wasn't entirely personal. He genuinely believed the project mattered, that humanity needed a new foundation for knowledge, that the old methods had failed and something better was possible. Whether he was right about the specifics matters less than that he asked the question with such seriousness and dedication. The chicken experiment, dying in a damp room after testing preservation through cold, seems almost too symbolic. But symbols matter. They crystallize complex truths into memorable images. Bacon dying in pursuit of empirical knowledge, killed by his own insistence on experiment over speculation, captures something true about his life and work. He meant what he wrote. The commitment to systematic investigation wasn't theoretical posturing. It was serious enough to risk discomfort, serious enough ultimately to cost him his life. The symbolism works too well. It's almost theatrical, the corrupt politician dying in pursuit of experimental truth, the man who betrayed friends for advancement, finally sacrificing himself for knowledge. But stripping away the narrative satisfaction reveals something more interesting. The chicken experiment wasn't noble. It was cold, uncomfortable, and ultimately pointless. Bacon didn't discover anything useful about preservation. He just got sick. The dedication to empiricism didn't require that particular test at that particular moment. He could have waited for better weather, warmer accommodation, healthier circumstances, but he didn't. Why? Compulsion, maybe. The same drive that pushed him through decades of political maneuvering, through the writing of thousands of pages, through the endless revisions and expansions of the Instauratio. He couldn't stop. Even when stopping would have been wiser, safer, more rational. The methodical philosopher who preached careful observation and systematic investigation died because he couldn't resist one more experiment. That contradiction captures something essential about Bacon's character and legacy. He advocated patience while being fundamentally impatient. He warned against hasty conclusions while rushing to test hypotheses. He designed elaborate systems for organized research while working largely alone. The gap between theory and practice, between what he said should happen and what he actually did, runs through his entire career. Consider the natural histories he published in those final years. Historia Ventorum, Historia Vitae et Mortis, both part of the grand Instauratio project. They're collections of observations, facts, anecdotes, measurements, exactly what Bacon said natural philosophy needed, but they're also chaotic, unsystematic, mixing genuine insight with folklore and speculation. He advocated for careful distinction between observation and interpretation, then blurred those lines constantly in his own work. The wind history includes useful meteorological observations alongside astrological nonsense. The life and death history combines anatomical facts with stories about longevity that have no empirical foundation. These aren't failures of execution, they're failures of the method itself. Bacon's tables, his elaborate classification systems, his careful procedures for eliminating false causes, they didn't work as advertised. You couldn't actually derive reliable knowledge just by following his steps. The method was too mechanical, too confident that nature would reveal itself through proper organization of facts. Real scientific discovery doesn't work that way. It requires imagination, intuition, theoretical frameworks that go beyond mere data collection. Bacon knew this actually. His own best work relied on exactly the kind of creative theorizing he officially dismissed. The doctrine of the idols demonstrates this perfectly. Its brilliant psychological analysis disguised as methodological prescription. The idols of the tribe, those errors built into human perception and cognition. The idols of the cave, individual biases shaped by personal experience and temperament, the idols of the marketplace, distortions introduced by language and social interaction, the idols of the theatre, false philosophies inherited from tradition and authority. This taxonomy didn't come from systematic observation, it came from introspection, from thinking carefully about how minds work, from recognizing patterns in intellectual error. It's philosophy, not natural history, and it's more valuable than most of his supposedly empirical work. The same applies to his political writings. The essays, published in multiple expanding editions throughout his life, contain genuine wisdom about human nature and governance, not because Bacon observed many cases and derived general principles, but because he thought deeply about his own experience and articulated insights that resonated with readers. When he writes about ambition, revenge, friendship, negotiation, he's not reporting experimental results. He's reflecting philosophically on what he's learned from decades in power. The best parts of Bacon aren't the parts that follow his own method. This creates problems for his admirers and critics alike. Admirers want to credit him with founding modern science, but the specific method he advocated didn't produce the scientific revolution. Descartes, Galileo, Newton, none of them worked the way Bacon said scientists should work. They used mathematics, which Bacon undervalued. They employed hypothetical reasoning, which Bacon distrusted. They built theoretical systems, which Bacon considered premature. The actual scientific progress of the 17th century happened despite Bacon's method, not because of it. Yet something about his work mattered enormously. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, claimed Bacon as inspiration. Robert Boyle, Robert Hooke, other pioneering experimental scientists acknowledged his influence. The French philosophes of the 18th century celebrated him as the prophet of reason against superstition. He became symbolic of a new approach to knowledge, even though the details of his system didn't survive scrutiny. What survived was the attitude, the insistence that nature should be interrogated through experience rather than authority, the conviction that knowledge should serve human welfare rather than abstract contemplation, the recognition that systematic error plagues human reasoning and requires methodical correction. These general orientations shaped scientific culture more than any specific technique. Bacon created a template, a vision of what natural philosophy could become, even if the path he outlined didn't actually lead there. The personal cost of this intellectual achievement remains troubling. Bacon sacrificed relationships, ethics, perhaps happiness in pursuit of advancement and influence. He believed worldly power would enable his philosophical work, that political position would provide resources and authority for his grand project. Instead, political life consumed his time and energy, leaving only fragments of the comprehensive system he envisioned. The compromise didn't work. He didn't get enough power to implement his vision, and the power he did achieve corrupted him without producing compensation. Alice Barnum, his wife, represents another casualty. The marriage was transactional from the start. She brought money and connections. He provided status and prospects. When the prospects collapsed, when the bribery conviction destroyed his political career, she apparently felt betrayed. Some accounts suggest she became involved with another man, possibly John Underhill, Bacon's gentleman usher. Whether this happened before or after Bacon's death is disputed, but the relationship was clearly troubled. Bacon left her almost nothing in his will beyond the required dower. He gave generously to servants, to friends, to institutions, but his wife received minimal consideration. The pattern repeats throughout his life. People served purposes, then were discarded when no longer useful. Essex, the patron who promoted his career, prosecuted when political winds shifted. Colleagues in Parliament, allies when convenient, abandoned when they became liabilities. Even his brother Anthony, who worked alongside him for years, faded from the record without much sentiment. Bacon wasn't cruel exactly. He was instrumental. People were means to ends, and the ends involved his work, his advancement, his grand philosophical project. This instrumentalism extended to his writing. The essays were expanded and revised through multiple editions, not because Bacon had new insights to share, but because each new edition could attract patronage and attention. The dedications changed with political circumstances. The content was adjusted to current concerns. Even the philosophical works presented as disinterested pursuit of truth were crafted to appeal to potential supporters. The Novum Organum was dedicated to King James, with elaborate flattery about the king's wisdom and learning. The dedication served a purpose. None of this invalidates the content. An insight doesn't become false because it was expressed for strategic reasons, but it complicates the image of the pure philosopher dedicated solely to truth. Bacon was always calculating, always considering how work would be received, always positioning himself for advantage. The mind that produced brilliant analysis of human bias was itself thoroughly biased towards self-interest. The final quinquennium, those last 5 years devoted entirely to philosophical work, might seem like redemption. Political disgrace forcing return to first principles, corrupt politician becoming honest scholar. But even that narrative is too clean. Bacon kept hoping for restoration to favour. He wrote to the king, to Buckingham, seeking pardon, requesting positions, angling for rehabilitation. The philosophical work wasn't chosen freely. It was what remained after other options closed. He would have returned to power if given the chance. What he produced during those years matters regardless of motivation. The expanded De Augmentis Scientiarum, the Latin version of the advancement of learning with substantial additions, represented his most systematic statement about the organisation of knowledge. The natural histories, flawed as they were, demonstrated commitment to empirical investigation. The New Atlantis, published posthumously, outlined his vision of collaborative scientific research. All of this had influence, shaped how subsequent generations thought about knowledge and its pursuit. The New Atlantis deserves particular attention. Its utopian fiction describing Bensalem, an island society organised around Salomon's House, a state-sponsored research institution. Scientists there investigate nature systematically, developing technologies that improve human life. The institution has specialists for different tasks, some collecting observations, others conducting experiments, still others deriving general principles. It's collaborative, well-funded, focused on practical benefits. Bacon imagined organised science before it existed. The vision was prescient. Modern research institutions, universities, laboratories, they resemble Salomon's House more than anything that existed in Bacon's time. The division of labour, the systematic approach, the connection between basic research and practical application, all of this became standard. But Bacon's version was authoritarian. The scientists of Salomon's House decide what knowledge to share with the public and what to withhold. They're not accountable to democratic processes. They serve the state but also control information for their own purposes. The utopia contains seeds of technocracy, of rule by experts who aren't answerable to those they govern. This reflects Bacon's political experience and assumptions. He never trusted popular judgment. He believed governance required wisdom that ordinary people lacked. The same applied to natural philosophy. The masses couldn't understand sophisticated research. They needed to be given results, applications, technologies that improved their lives. But the actual work of investigation, the determination of what counted as knowledge that belonged to trained specialists. Bacon's vision of science was never populist. It was elitist, hierarchical, organised from above. Modern science inherited this structure while adding democratic elements Bacon didn't anticipate. Peer review, replication, public funding, accountability. These represent attempts to check expert authority while maintaining specialised knowledge. The tension remains unresolved. How do you organize systematic research requiring expertise while keeping it accountable to broader society? Bacon posed the question without providing answers that satisfied later generations. His influence on the Enlightenment demonstrates both the power and the problems of his legacy. Voltaire, Diderot, the encyclopedists, they celebrated Bacon as champion of reason against superstition, of observation against dogma, of progress against tradition. They used his authority to attack the Catholic Church, aristocratic privilege, obscurantist philosophy. Bacon became a weapon in intellectual and political battles he never fought. The actual content of his work mattered less than the symbolic function he served. This appropriation distorted his views. Bacon was neither an atheist nor a democrat. He was conventionally religious, attending church, writing theological works, seeing natural philosophy as revealing God's creation. He supported monarchy, opposed popular sovereignty, believed in rigid social hierarchy. The philosophers stripped away context and created a Bacon who fit their purposes. Now, they weren't wrong to do this exactly. Intellectual traditions developed through creative misreading as much as faithful transmission. But it means the Bacon who influenced the 18th century wasn't quite the person who lived in the 17th. The same pattern continues. Each era finds its own Bacon. The 19th century emphasized his inductivism, making him the prophet of Victorian scientific naturalism. The 20th century focused on his critique of language and social construction of knowledge, anticipating postmodern concerns. The 21st century sees his warnings about cognitive bias as predicting behavioral economics and psychology. All of these readings have textual support. Bacon's work is rich and contradictory enough to sustain multiple interpretations, but they can't all be equally accurate to his actual thought. What remains consistent is the sense that Bacon matters, that his work represents something important about how we acquire and organize knowledge. The specific claims may be outdated, the method may be superseded, the political vision may be unappealing, but the project itself, the attempt to create systematic foundations for reliable knowledge, continues to resonate. We're still trying to do what Bacon tried to do, just with different tools and assumptions. His failure to complete the instauratio, to construct the comprehensive system he envisioned, seems less significant now than the attempt itself. No single person could reorganize all knowledge. The task was impossibly ambitious from the start, but the ambition demonstrated what philosophy could attempt, what systematic thinking might achieve. Bacon showed that knowledge could be a project, something to be built deliberately rather than accumulated haphazardly. That insight survived even when the particular building plans didn't. The final letter he wrote, dictated from his sickbed to the Earl of Arundel, apologised for dying in his host's house. Characteristically, Bacon worried about social propriety even while dying. He remained conscious of his position, his obligations, the impression he made. The content of his philosophical work advocated transcending such concerns, looking past social convention to natural truth. But the man himself never fully escaped the world of courts and patronage and careful self-presentation. The tension between the philosopher and the courtier lasted to the end. The symbolism works too well. It's almost theatrical, the corrupt politician dying in pursuit of experimental truth, the man who betrayed friends for advancement, finally sacrificing himself for knowledge. But stripping away the narrative satisfaction reveals something more interesting. The chicken experiment wasn't noble. It was cold, uncomfortable, and ultimately pointless. Bacon didn't discover anything useful about preservation. He just got sick. The dedication to empiricism didn't require that particular test at that particular moment. He could have waited for better weather, warmer accommodation, healthier circumstances, but he didn't. Why? Compulsion, maybe? the same drive that pushed him through decades of political maneuvering, through the writing of thousands of pages, through the endless revisions and expansions of the Instauratio. He couldn't stop, even when stopping would have been wiser, safer, more rational. The methodical philosopher who preached careful observation and systematic investigation died because he couldn't resist one more experiment. That contradiction captures something essential about Bacon's character and legacy. He advocated patience while being fundamentally impatient. He warned against hasty conclusions while rushing to test hypotheses. He designed elaborate systems for organized research while working largely alone. The gap between theory and practice, between what he said should happen and what he actually did, runs through his entire career. Consider the natural histories he published in those final years. Historia Ventorum, Historia Vitae et Mortis, both part of the Grand Instauratio project. They're collections of observations, facts, anecdotes, measurements, exactly what Bacon said natural philosophy needed. But they're also chaotic, unsystematic, mixing genuine insight with folklore and speculation. He advocated for careful distinction between observation and interpretation, then blurred those lines constantly in his own work. The wind history includes useful meteorological observations alongside astrological nonsense. The life and death history combines anatomical facts with stories about longevity that have no empirical foundation. These aren't failures of execution, they're failures of the method itself. Bacon's tables, his elaborate classification systems, his careful procedures for eliminating false causes, they didn't work as advertised. You couldn't actually derive reliable knowledge just by following his steps. The method was too mechanical, too confident that nature would reveal itself through proper organization of facts. Real scientific discovery doesn't work that way. It requires imagination, intuition, theoretical frameworks that go beyond mere data collection. Bacon knew this actually. His own best work relied on exactly the kind of creative theorizing he officially dismissed. The doctrine of the idols demonstrates this perfectly. It's brilliant psychological analysis disguised as methodological prescription. The idols of the tribe, those errors built into human perception and cognition. The idols of the cave, individual biases shaped by personal experience and temperament. The idols of the marketplace, distortions introduced by language and social interaction. The idols of the theatre, false philosophies inherited from tradition and authority. This taxonomy didn't come from systematic observation. It came from introspection, from thinking carefully about how minds work, from recognizing patterns in intellectual error. It's philosophy, not natural history, and it's more valuable than most of his supposedly empirical work. The same applies to his political writings. The essays, published in multiple expanding editions throughout his life, contain genuine wisdom about human nature and governance. Not because Bacon observed many cases and derived general principles, but because he thought deeply about his own experience and articulated insights that resonated with readers. When he writes about ambition, revenge, friendship, negotiation, he's not reporting experimental results. He's reflecting philosophically on what he's learned from decades in power. The best parts of Bacon aren't the parts that follow his own method. This creates problems for his admirers and critics alike. Admirers want to credit him with founding modern science, but the specific method he advocated didn't produce the scientific revolution. Descartes, Galileo, Newton, none of them worked the way Bacon said scientists should work. They used mathematics, which Bacon undervalued. They employed hypothetical reasoning, which Bacon distrusted. They built theoretical systems, which Bacon considered premature. The actual scientific progress of the 17th century happened despite Bacon's method, not because of it. Yet something about his work mattered enormously. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, claimed Bacon as inspiration. Robert Boyle, Robert Hooke, other pioneering experimental scientists acknowledged his influence. The French philosophes of the 18th century celebrated him as the prophet of reason against superstition. He became symbolic of a new approach to knowledge, even though the details of his system didn't survive scrutiny. What survived was the attitude, the insistence that nature should be interrogated through experience rather than authority, the conviction that knowledge should serve human welfare rather than abstract contemplation, the recognition that systematic error plagues human reasoning and requires methodical correction. These general orientations shaped scientific culture more than any specific technique. Bacon created a template, a vision of what natural philosophy could become, even if the path he outlined didn't actually lead there. The personal cost of this intellectual achievement remains troubling. Bacon sacrificed relationships, ethics, perhaps happiness in pursuit of advancement and influence. He believed worldly power would enable his philosophical work, that political position would provide resources and authority for his grand project. Instead, political life consumed his time and energy, leaving only fragments of the comprehensive system he envisioned. The compromise didn't work. He didn't get enough power to implement his vision, and the power he did achieve corrupted him without producing compensation. Alice Barnum, his wife, represents another casualty. The marriage was transactional from the start. She brought money and connections. He provided status and prospects. When the prospects collapsed, when the bribery conviction destroyed his political career, she apparently felt betrayed. Some accounts suggest she became involved with another man, possibly John Underhill, Bacon's gentleman usher. Whether this happened before or after Bacon's death is disputed, but the relationship was clearly troubled. Bacon left her almost nothing in his will beyond the required dower. He gave generously to servants, to friends, to institutions, but his wife received minimal consideration. The pattern repeats throughout his life. People served purposes, then were discarded when no longer useful. Essex, the patron who promoted his career, prosecuted when political winds shifted. Colleagues in Parliament, allies when convenient, abandoned when they became liabilities. Even his brother Anthony, who worked alongside him for years, faded from the record without much sentiment. Bacon wasn't cruel exactly. He was instrumental. People were means to ends, and the ends involved his work, his advancement, his grand philosophical project. This instrumentalism extended to his writing. The essays were expanded and revised through multiple editions, not because Bacon had new insights to share, but because each new edition could attract patronage and attention. The dedications changed with political circumstances. The content was adjusted to current concerns. Even the philosophical works, presented as disinterested pursuit of truth, were crafted to appeal to potential supporters. The Novum Organum was dedicated to King James, with elaborate flattery about the king's wisdom and learning. The dedication served a purpose. None of this invalidates the content. An insight doesn't become false because it was expressed for strategic reasons, but it complicates the image of the pure philosopher dedicated solely to truth. Bacon was always calculating, always considering how work would be received, always positioning himself for advantage. The mind that produced brilliant analysis of human bias was itself thoroughly biased towards self-interest. The final quinquennium, those last 5 years devoted entirely to philosophical work, might seem like redemption. Political disgrace forcing return to first principles, corrupt politician becoming honest scholar. But even that narrative is too clean. Bacon kept hoping for restoration to favour. He wrote to the king, to Buckingham, seeking pardon, requesting positions, angling for rehabilitation. The philosophical work wasn't chosen freely. It was what remained after other options closed. He would have returned to power if given the chance. What he produced during those years matters regardless of motivation. The expanded De Augmentis Scientiarum, The Latin version of The Advancement of Learning with Substantial Additions represented his most systematic statement about the organization of knowledge. The natural histories, flawed as they were, demonstrated commitment to empirical investigation. The New Atlantis, published posthumously, outlined his vision of collaborative scientific research. All of this had influence, shaped how subsequent generations thought about knowledge and its pursuit. The New Atlantis deserves particular attention. It's utopian fiction describing Bensalem, an island society organized around Salomon's House, a state-sponsored research institution. Scientists there investigate nature systematically, developing technologies that improve human life. The institution has specialists for different tasks, some collecting observations, others conducting experiments, still others deriving general principles. It's collaborative, well-funded, focused on practical benefits. Bacon imagined organized science before it existed. The vision was prescient. Modern research institutions, universities, laboratories, they resemble Salomon's House more than anything that existed in Bacon's time. The division of labour, the systematic approach, the connection between basic research and practical application, all of this became standard. But Bacon's version was authoritarian. The scientists of Salomon's House decide what knowledge to share with the public and what to withhold. They're not accountable to democratic processes. They serve the state, but also control information for their own purposes. The utopia contains seeds of technocracy, of rule by experts who aren't answerable to those they govern. This reflects Bacon's political experience and assumptions. He never trusted popular judgment. He believed governance required wisdom that ordinary people lacked. The same applied to natural philosophy. The masses couldn't understand sophisticated research. They needed to be given results, applications, technologies that improved their lives. But the actual work of investigation, the determination of what counted as knowledge, that belonged to trained specialists. Bacon's vision of science was never populist. It was elitist, hierarchical, organized from above. Modern science inherited this structure while adding democratic elements Bacon didn't anticipate. Peer review, replication, public funding, accountability. These represent attempts to check expert authority while maintaining specialized knowledge. The tension remains unresolved. How do you organize systematic research requiring expertise while keeping it accountable to broader society? Bacon posed the question without providing answers that satisfied later generations. His influence on the Enlightenment demonstrates both the power and the problems of his legacy. Voltaire, Diderot, the encyclopedists, they celebrated Bacon as champion of reason against superstition, of observation against dogma, of progress against tradition. They used his authority to attack the Catholic Church, aristocratic privilege, obscurantist philosophy. Bacon became a weapon in intellectual and political battles he never fought. The actual content of his work mattered less than the symbolic function he served. This appropriation distorted his views. Bacon was neither an atheist nor a Democrat. He was conventionally religious, attending church, writing theological works, seeing natural philosophy as revealing God's creation. He supported monarchy, opposed popular sovereignty, believed in rigid social hierarchy. The philosophers stripped away context and created a Bacon who fit their purposes. They weren't wrong to do this exactly. Intellectual traditions develop through creative misreading as much as faithful transmission. But it means the Bacon who influenced the 18th century wasn't quite the person who lived in the 17th. The same pattern continues. Each era finds its own Bacon. The 19th century emphasized his inductivism, making him the prophet of Victorian scientific naturalism. The 20th century focused on his critique of language and social construction of knowledge, anticipating postmodern concerns. The 21st century sees his warnings about cognitive bias as predicting behavioral economics and psychology. All of these readings have textual support. Bacon's work is rich and contradictory enough to sustain multiple interpretations, but they can't all be equally accurate to his actual thought. What remains consistent is the sense that Bacon matters, that his work represents something important about how we acquire and organize knowledge. The specific claims may be outdated, the method may be superseded, the political vision may be unappealing, but the project itself, the attempt to create systematic foundations for reliable knowledge, continues to resonate. We're still trying to do what Bacon tried to do, just with different tools and assumptions. His failure to complete the instauratio, to construct the comprehensive system he envisioned, seems less significant now than the attempt itself. No single person could reorganize all knowledge. The task was impossibly ambitious from the start. But the ambition demonstrated what philosophy could attempt, what systematic thinking might achieve. Bacon showed that knowledge could be a project, something to be built deliberately rather than accumulated haphazardly. That insight survived even when the particular building plans didn't. The final letter he wrote, dictated from his sickbed to the Earl of Arundel, apologised for dying in his host's house. Characteristically, Bacon worried about social propriety even while dying. He remained conscious of his position, his obligations, the impression he made. The content of his philosophical work advocated transcending such concerns, looking past social convention to natural truth. But the man himself never fully escaped the world of courts and patronage and careful self-presentation. The tension between the philosopher and the courtier lasted to the end. His death became another story, another piece of the legend. The chicken stuffed with snow, the experiment gone wrong, the philosopher dying in pursuit of knowledge. It's almost too perfect, this ending. A man who spent decades advocating empirical method dies conducting an empirical test. The symbolism writes itself, but consider what actually happened. An elderly man with chronic health problems went out in winter weather, conducted a spontaneous experiment, got sick, and died. The snow had nothing to do with it. The chicken was incidental. Bacon was 65, not young, not healthy, living in an era when winter illnesses killed routinely. The experiment didn't kill him. March did. Yet the story persists because it fits. Bacon the martyr to science. Bacon dying as he lived, testing nature. The narrative is too satisfying to abandon, even when the facts don't quite support it. This is ironic for a man who spent his career warning against exactly this tendency, against letting attractive stories substitute for careful observation. The myth of Bacon's death reveals something about how we remember thinkers. We want their lives to illustrate their ideas. We want coherent narratives where the biography matches the philosophy. When reality doesn't cooperate, we adjust reality. Bacon would have recognised this as an idol of the theatre, the tendency to impose dramatic structure on messy actuality. What gets lost in the myth-making is the mundane reality of his final years. After his fall from power, Bacon lived quietly, mostly at Gorhambury, his family estate in Hertfordshire. He worked on his philosophical projects, yes, but he also managed property, dealt with creditors, worried about money. The life of the mind doesn't exempt you from the life of bills and debts and everyday concerns. His relationship with his wife Alice deteriorated during these years. Money was part of it. She'd married the Lord Chancellor, a man of power and wealth. Instead, she got a disgraced politician with massive debts. But there seems to have been more to it than finances. Contemporary gossip suggested she took lovers. Bacon's will, revised shortly before his death, cut her out almost entirely, leaving her only what the law required. Whatever affection had existed between them, it was gone by the end. He had no children. His legacy would be intellectual, not biological. Perhaps this mattered to him, perhaps not. The sources don't say. Bacon wrote obsessively about posterity, about his ideas surviving him, but whether he wanted biological descendants remains unknown. The personal Bacon, the man who felt and wanted things beyond philosophy and advancement, stays stubbornly hidden. What we can see is the work. The final years produced an extraordinary burst of writing, the De Augmentis Scientiarum, expanding and translating the advancement of learning, the Historia Ventorum, cataloguing winds, the Historia Vitae et Mortis, examining life and death, the third edition of the Essays, revised and expanded. Even in disgrace, even in debt, even as his health failed, Bacon kept writing. This compulsion to write, to systematize, to organize knowledge, never left him. He couldn't complete the Instauratio Magna. The project was too vast, the remaining time too short. But he could produce pieces of it, fragments that might contribute to the larger edifice, even if he couldn't finish the structure himself. The question of who would continue the work obsessed him. He had no students in the formal sense, no school he'd founded. His ideas existed in books, available to anyone who could read Latin or English. But would anyone actually use them? Would the method find practitioners, or would it die with him? The answer came slowly. Bacon's immediate influence was smaller than his posthumous reputation suggests. Natural philosophers in the 1630s and 1640s knew his work, cited it, but didn't follow his method precisely. The detailed procedures he'd outlined in the Novum Organum proved too cumbersome for actual research. Scientists took inspiration from his general principles while ignoring his specific instructions. Robert Boyle comes closest to being a Baconian experimentalist. Boyle's emphasis on careful observation, systematic experimentation, and collaborative verification reflects Bacon's vision. But even Boyle didn't follow the method mechanically. He adapted it, modified it, made it work for chemistry in ways Bacon hadn't anticipated. This is how intellectual influence actually works, through creative adaptation rather than slavish imitation. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, claimed Bacon as inspiration. Thomas Spratt's History of the Royal Society portrayed Bacon as the prophet of experimental philosophy, the man who'd shown the way. But the Society's actual practice diverged from Bacon's prescriptions. They didn't systematically compile natural histories. They didn't follow the method of tables. They did experiments, yes, but experiments driven by curiosity and opportunity, rather than by comprehensive, systematic plans. This gap between claimed influence and actual practice is typical. Bacon became a symbolic figure, someone you cited to legitimate your work, whether or not you actually followed his method. Being Baconian meant supporting experiment over speculation, observation over theory, practical utility over abstract contemplation. The specifics of how you did this mattered less than the general commitment to empirical inquiry. Newton presents an interesting case. He never claimed to be Baconian. His method combined mathematical deduction with experimental testing in ways that don't fit Bacon's purely inductive approach. Yet Newton's success vindicated Bacon's broader argument that systematic investigation of nature could produce revolutionary insights. The Principia proved that natural philosophy could achieve certainty, could uncover laws, could transform human understanding. This was what Bacon had promised, even if Newton's path to it differed from Bacon's prescribed route. The 18th century elevated Bacon to canonical status. Voltaire, d'Alembert, Diderot, they presented him as the founder of modern philosophy, the man who'd broken with medieval scholasticism and shown the way forward. The Encyclopédie placed Bacon at the root of its tree of knowledge. He became an Enlightenment saint, the patron of reason and progress. This canonization required editing. Bacon's political conservatism didn't fit the Enlightenment narrative. His religious orthodoxy seemed embarrassing. His involvement in torture during interrogations, his prosecution of Essex, his acceptance of bribes, these got quietly minimised. What remained was Bacon the philosopher, Bacon the advocate of reason, Bacon the prophet of scientific progress. A sanitised version, useful for Enlightenment purposes, but not quite the person who actually lived. The 19th century brought different concerns. Victorian scientists and philosophers debated whether Bacon's method actually worked. John Stuart Mill defended induction while acknowledging its limitations. William Whewell argued that discovery required creative insight, not mechanical data collection. Both engaged seriously with Bacon's ideas, but both concluded that his method needed significant modification. The emergence of experimental psychology and sociology raised new questions about Bacon's doctrine of idols. Was he right that human cognition systematically distorts perception? Research suggested yes, though not quite in the ways Bacon described. The confirmation bias, the availability heuristic, groupthink, these modern concepts echo Bacon's warnings about cognitive errors. He'd identified real problems, even if his solutions proved inadequate. The 20th century saw another shift. Philosophers of science like Karl Popper rejected inductivism entirely, arguing that science proceeds through conjecture and refutation rather than gradual accumulation of observations. Thomas Kuhn's analysis of paradigm shifts suggested that scientific progress happens through revolutionary breaks rather than steady advancement. Both views challenged core Baconian assumptions about how knowledge grows. Yet Bacon's influence persisted, often in unexpected places. The emphasis on organised research, on institutional support for science, on collaboration and systematic data sharing, these reflect Baconian values even when the specific method is abandoned. Big science, with its laboratories and teams and long-term projects, realises Bacon's vision of Solomon's house more than any 17th century natural philosopher did. Consider medical research, clinical trials, systematic observation, careful record keeping, statistical analysis of outcomes. This is profoundly Baconian in spirit. Doctors test treatments empirically, compare results, build knowledge incrementally. The method isn't exactly what Bacon described, but the underlying philosophy is his. Knowledge comes from observation, from testing, from systematic comparison of cases. The same applies to data science and machine learning. Collecting massive data sets, looking for patterns, making predictions based on correlations. This embodies Bacon's faith that nature reveals regularities to patient observation. The computers do what Bacon imagined human investigators doing, searching through accumulated observations to find underlying structures. But there's a darker inheritance too. Bacon's vision of knowledge as power, of science as domination of nature, has troubling implications. Environmental destruction, technological systems beyond human control, the reduction of everything to data and optimization, these can be traced back to the Baconian project of mastering nature through knowledge. When Bacon wrote that knowledge and power are one, he meant it as liberation. Critics now see it as the root of ecological catastrophe. Feminist philosophers have particularly challenged Bacon's language, his descriptions of nature as female, to be unveiled and penetrated by male investigators, reveal assumptions about gender and domination that deserve scrutiny. The metaphor of nature as a woman to be conquered isn't unique to Bacon, but he used it pervasively, and it shaped how subsequent scientists conceived their relationship to the natural world. These critiques don't invalidate everything Bacon did. They complicate the picture, forcing us to acknowledge that his revolutionary method carried costs as well as benefits. Knowledge as power can mean liberation or oppression, depending on who wields it and toward what ends. Bacon saw only the positive potential. We've learned to recognize the dangers. What remains valuable in Bacon's work? the systematic skepticism, the insistence on evidence, the recognition that human minds systematically deceive themselves. The doctrine of idols, in particular, still resonates. We understand now, better than Bacon did, how cognitive biases operate, but his fundamental insight was correct. Human reasoning is fallible, predictably so, and we need methods to correct for our built-in errors. The commitment to collaborative knowledge building also endures. Bacon's vision of investigators sharing observations, building on each other's work, creating cumulative knowledge, this describes modern science accurately. Individual genius matters, but progress depends on institutions, on communication, on collective effort. Bacon understood this when most philosophers still saw knowledge as individual contemplation. The utility argument has proven more controversial. Should science serve practical purposes or pursue truth for its own sake? Bacon insisted on usefulness, on improving human life through knowledge. Pure research driven by curiosity alone, seemed to him a luxury. Modern science has shown that the distinction breaks down, that curiosity-driven research often produces unexpected practical benefits, that you can't predict which investigations will prove useful. Yet Bacon's basic point holds. Knowledge that can't be applied, that doesn't change anything, has limited value. Not zero value, but limited. The test of an idea isn't just whether it's beautiful or elegant, but whether it works, whether it helps us understand and navigate the world. This pragmatic criterion remains central to scientific practice. The incomplete Instauratio Magna haunts Bacon's legacy. He wanted to reconstruct all knowledge, to create a complete system built on empirical foundations. He failed, obviously. The task was impossible, would have been impossible for anyone, but the ambition shaped what followed. Later thinkers accepted that knowledge could be systematized, that comprehensive understanding was a legitimate goal, that philosophy could be a constructive project rather than just criticism and analysis. The essays show a different Bacon, one less concerned with system building. These short pieces on practical topics, on friendship, on ambition, on death, reveal someone thinking through lived experience rather than constructing grand theories. They're wise without being systematic, insightful without being comprehensive. If the Novum Organum is Bacon trying to revolutionize philosophy, the essays are Bacon trying to understand how to live. The contrast is instructive. Bacon the systematic philosopher and Bacon the essayist coexisted in the same person. He could advocate for comprehensive method while writing pieces that resisted systematization. Perhaps this tension explains why his influence has been so varied, so open to different interpretations. The work itself doesn't fully cohere, contains contradictions, allows multiple readings. His personal contradictions matter too. The man who wrote about truth served power cynically. The advocate of cooperative knowledge building betrayed his patron. The champion of utility accumulated debts pursuing his own advancement. These aren't hypocrisies exactly, but they're tensions that never resolved. Bacon wanted incompatible things and got some of them at the cost of others. The question of whether he was a good person seems beside the point now. He did some admirable things and some despicable things. He helped torture suspects. He also wrote works that advanced human understanding. Both are true. Historical figures contain multitudes, and Bacon more than most. The complexity can't be reduced to a simple judgment. What can be said is that his life and work shaped how we think about knowledge, method, science, progress. The shape isn't always what he intended. His influence worked through transformation and distortion as much as direct transmission. But the influence is real, traceable, ongoing. The scientific revolution that followed happened without Bacon's direct participation. He died in 1626, conducting an experiment to the end. The story of his death became legendary, though the details are disputed. He was riding through snow near Highgate when the idea struck him that cold might preserve meat. He stopped the carriage, bought a chicken from a nearby cottage, and stuffed it with snow to test the hypothesis. The experiment worked, but Bacon caught a chill. Bronchitis developed. Within days, he was dead at Arundel House, writing letters about the successful preservation experiment, even as pneumonia killed him. A martyr to empiricism, some said. Others noted the irony of a man who advocated careful method dying from an impulsive roadside test. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, claimed Bacon as their intellectual ancestor. They weren't directly implementing his method. The tables of presence and absence proved too cumbersome for practical research, but they embraced his spirit. Experimental philosophy, collaborative investigation, practical application. These became their watchwords. Robert Boyle, Robert Hooke, Christopher Wren, Isaac Newton, they all acknowledged debt to Bacon's vision, even as they developed methods he hadn't imagined. The Society's motto, nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it, echoed Bacon's rejection of authority. Test everything. Trust observation over received wisdom. Newton presents an interesting case. His Principia Mathematica combined mathematics and experiment in ways Bacon never anticipated. Bacon had been skeptical of mathematics, seeing it as abstract speculation disconnected from physical reality. Newton proved you could use mathematical reasoning to discover laws of nature, then test those laws through observation. This wasn't pure Baconian induction. It involved hypothesis, deduction, mathematical derivation. But the commitment to empirical verification, to bringing theory into contact with observable phenomena, that came from Bacon's influence. Even when scientists weren't following his method precisely, they were working within the framework he'd established. The French Enlightenment embraced Bacon enthusiastically. Voltaire called him the father of experimental philosophy. Diderot and d'Alembert structured their encyclopédie partly on Baconian principles, organizing knowledge systematically, emphasizing practical utility, challenging received authority. The classification system they used derived from Bacon's division of knowledge according to mental faculties. Memory produced history, reason produced philosophy, imagination produced poetry. This scheme seems arbitrary now, but it represented an attempt to organize all human knowledge according to a rational principle rather than traditional categories. The German response was more complex. Kant acknowledged Bacon's importance, but argued that pure observation couldn't generate knowledge without conceptual frameworks. You needed categories of understanding, ways of organizing experience. Bacon had underestimated how much the mind contributes to knowledge, how observation itself depends on theoretical assumptions. This criticism had force. Bacon's ideal of approaching nature with a completely blank slate, free from all preconceptions, was impossible. Observation is always theory-laden. You see what your concepts allow you to see. Yet Kant's correction didn't invalidate Bacon's core insight. Even if pure induction is impossible, even if observation requires conceptual frameworks, the frameworks themselves must be tested against experience. You can't deduce the structure of nature from first principles alone. At some point, theory must confront evidence. Bacon established that principle, even if his account of how it works needed refinement. The 19th century brought new interpretations. John Stuart Mill developed a more sophisticated version of inductive logic, addressing problems Bacon hadn't solved. William Whewell emphasized the role of hypothesis and creative insight in scientific discovery, arguing against naive inductivism. But both acknowledged Bacon as the starting point. The conversation about scientific method that he initiated continued even as participants modified or rejected his specific proposals.